Welcome back to the Self-Esteem and Confidence Mindset podcast of me, Johnny Pardo, here to help you work through imposter syndrome to your self-confidence to get to where you want to go. Today, I've got a very special guest with me. I welcome Dr. Stephen Crawford. Hey, Stephen, how you doing?
Hey, how's it going? Good to be here, Johnny. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I appreciate you. I appreciate you for coming on. I know you're such a man in demand. So, the value we're going to get from you today, I really, really appreciate that. So, yeah, we'll dive in a moment. So, just a quick introduction to Stephen, and then he can tell us a little bit more about what he does. So, Stephen is also part of the neuro encoding community I'm in. He's the main presenter, one of the leadership team within that. So, neuro encoding, just for those who aren't familiar, is about getting your psychology right, so you default to your best behaviors to help you to get to where you want to go. So Stephen is a motivational speaker, very motivational, definitely, trust me. He's a coach for leaders as well to help them grow and get the best out of themselves. And he's also an author, which is awesome. So I always like to get great podcast guests on here for you. So I just realized that, I hadn't necessarily got anything recently or for a long time on leadership. So I've got Stephen today to give us some knowledge about that. And actually, we're going to touch a little bit on our stories and our self-confidence. So Stephen, once again, it's great to have you on here. Could you tell us a little bit more about what you do and how you got to where you are today?
Well, no, I appreciate that, Johnny. One of the things that I think is really important to know about the work that I get the opportunity to do and the people I get to serve is that I actually started out in the non-for-profit world, not working for profit, but really trying to have an impact and make a difference for people. And I ran an organization for about a decade. And when it started running out of resources and money, we unfortunately had to close our doors. And I started talking with business leaders about the possibility. And I love the fact that I got to speak with entrepreneurs and business leaders because it was like they were able to operate in a world that they didn't have to ask people for permission. If they wanted to do good, they just wrote a check or they just got involved with the cause. And I said, if I can really activate the heart and minds of leaders to really begin to engage not only their companies, but their worlds in ways that can have a transformative impact, I was going to be able to affect thousands or tens of thousands more lives than just working in a small nonprofit where we were just reaching maybe 300, 400 people a year. Well, if I'm working with just, let's say my company right now, we work with about 50 different companies. If all those leaders are tapped in and aligned with their purpose and with what they're trying to do and the impact they want to have on the world, they could be touching literally hundreds of thousands of lives. And so I really became committed to this idea of rather than taking my time trying to reach one to really partner with business leaders and activate their sense of purpose where they can just really have an impact on thousands or tens of thousands of people at a time.
Yeah, so the knock-on effect, like the mass effect as many people. And yeah, I definitely can relate that into kind of the coaching world as well, being a coach myself. And you impact one person's life and they might be an entrepreneur or career driven person. And actually, because they're feeling good within themselves, it has that knock-on effect to other people and they can go out and lead. No, that's awesome. And the way you saw how you could impact more people's lives. So I love that. That's awesome. So I'm kind of a big believer of leading yourself first as an individual, and then you lead teams, and then you lead, communities and or bigger than yourself. But I remember you talking recently about owning your story. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and how important understanding your own story is in leadership?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question, Johnny, because I think that the biggest fallacy that we all make is that we're living in a place, we're living in a time, and we're living in a geography, when that's actually not true. I think they say that the last thing that a fish will ever see that they've been in water their entire lives because they're so immersed and submerged within the water that they don't realize they're in water. And I think it's the same thing without our story. We think we're in Philadelphia or Cape Town, or we think we're in London, or we think we're in Minneapolis or Alberta. But in fact, that's not where we're living. That's just the backdrop. What we're really living is we're really living within our story. And we begin to absorb and collect ideas about the narrative that we live in. And all of us have a collection of ideas and thoughts and experiences that shape our story. And that's where we're really living in. As a matter of fact, when we look backwards, say, oh, that's his story. They call it history, because there's an experience that we come from that shapes us. And so what we're really living is within a story, within a narrative. And most people don't realize that this narrative is one that may have been influenced by other people, but it's a making of our own creation. And until we realize and become aware that we're within a story, it becomes incredibly difficult to shift and to change.
Yeah, totally agree. So what would you say, from your experience, are some of the first steps for people to become more aware of their own story?
Well, I think it's helpful, and I know that when I do this talk, we talk about the different types of stories that exist. We talk about some people are on a quest. That's one type of story. They've actually boiled it down. A lot of the experts have boiled it down to there's only really 7 stories ever told in the world. And so knowing what type of story you're in. So someone may be on a quest, which means they're never going to be fully satisfied where they are. They're always going to be seeking the adventure and the life of fulfillment, and fulfillment will always be out there. Some people like to say they have destination disease. They think that when I get there, then I'll finally be fulfilled. Then I'll finally be happy. So they're on a quest to find meaning, and they're on a quest to find love, or a quest to find joy. But whatever that quest is, they don't understand. If you don't understand that you're part of a narrative, you're part of a story, and you're constructing a world that has you on this quest seeking. They have somewhere sickness or destination disease. They think that when I get there, I'll finally be happy, and that level of satisfaction. And it's a tragedy because it never fully happens. Some people are under the impression that they're living in a tragedy, and they actually recreate episode and episode and episode of their lives that are just a series of events that really are often disheartening and end with a really dark reality. And these people often find themselves in depression, submerged in unfortunate situations that turn them into a tragedy. Other people are living a life of a comedy. Life's a party. Life's just full of different experiences where they're looking for ways in order to activate the parts of dopamine or serotonin within their body to be able to get excited, to get happy. And some people use all types of escapes to do this, whether it be alcohol or drugs or different things like that, where they just become overwhelmingly involved in these parts to try to make their lives essentially more funny. Some people live in what they call birth and renewal, which is the best example of that we have is the Wizard of or Beauty and the Beast, where they literally are living in a world where the things that they've surrounded them with are the creations of their own mind, and the experiences they've created for themselves are all looking grim and dark and deep. But boy, they have a hope that one day, roll the dice, one day, if I'm lucky, I'm going to win the lottery and I'm going to be out of this. There's going to be some catalytic event or experience that's going to lift them out of the dark existence of their reality. And so they set goals that just don't seem realistic based upon the activity they have going in their life. But they're not really become actors doing it themselves. They're waiting on something to happen to them. So that's just a few of the stories. I know that the most popular one is called Overcoming the Monster. That's the most popular narrative, where you're in conflict with something that's has a conspiracy out to destroy you, to destroy your family, to destroy your life, your community. And your role is to fight as the protagonist in order to fight for the victory. And so these are all stories and narratives we shape. So the first step is understanding, one, that you're part of a story, but two, trying to figure out what kind of story you're trying to tell. And if it's not the story that's in line with what you really want in life, then you've got to learn how to reshape or to break the script that's already been positioned for you in that life.
Yeah, No, I love some of the examples you gave there. There's one or two things sort of going in my mind, and certainly just for me and people I've worked with, and friends and family, that you can start to relate some of those stories to, definitely. So, do you feel like the different stories affect people's leadership abilities?
Without question, because if you're a victim and you're just, that's the story and the narrative that you've created for yourself, that you're struggling and you'll always be taken advantage of. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You get what you predict, and you continue to perpetuate and almost magnetize to yourself the thoughts and ideas, and the evolution of your story begins to fulfill exactly what you predicted. And so if you're a leader who feels like you've been victimized and everybody's out to get you, and you live your life in a conspiracy, you're always going to belittle people. You're always going to squash people down. You're going to make them feel like they don't measure up. And the reason that you do that is because you lack the self-awareness to change your scripts. And so you always interpret people's actions and behaviors. One just quick example I can give of this is if you believe that you are entitled to be followed. I know there are leaders out there that grew up in a generation that they gave people respect and deference just because they had the position of manager or CEO or boss. And that was their framework of life. So now that they're the CEO, the manager, or the boss, they anticipate and they expect that everybody will treat them with the same level of respect that they demonstrated. And so that's the story they tell themselves. So whenever someone disrespects them or doesn't honor them, they don't interpret it as maybe there's something about my entitlement and behavior that's the cause of this disrespect and resentment and frustration. They literally turn to they're bad people. So they criminalize people, and they basically create a narrative that makes everybody else the bad guy, while they themselves are the victim who's not giving the respect that they ultimately deserve. And so that's a destructive pattern that will cripple your ability to actually be an effective leader. And story is repeated hundreds and thousands of times. I'm sure yourself, as well as even your listeners, can really already see people in their minds. Yeah. And they see themselves as overcoming the monster when they're dealing with their boss,
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I guess it goes the other way for leaders, being helping them to understand maybe the different types of stories some of those who they're leading are having, and being able to actually approach that way as well.
Yeah, well, one of the most exciting things about leadership is you set the tone and you can shape the narrative. You can actually create a story that's bigger than what everyone else is living in. And you can write the scripts. You can determine in your meetings and in the way in which you lead that this is a story. You can determine a villain. You can actually say, hey, we're gonna go out and we're gonna kill it this quarter, and we're not going to take no for an answer. And you can actually create an enemy out of your competition, or create an enemy out of you. And you can shape the narrative and create the story that invites people into a place where they really, really begin to become excited about working in that type of environment. And as a leader, you have the power and potential to do that, but only when you, as Joseph, one of our mentors, would say, no, physician, heal thyself. Only when you realize that you've had the problem, right, to begin with, can you start to reshape a narrative. But as long as you're living in those old scripts and old habitual patterns, you'll be stuck there. So leaders have the ability, a very powerful ability, to set the script, to set the stage, and really begin to introduce their team into a new way of leading and a new way of living by creating a story that's going to make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love the power they've got. But as you said, the quote, one of my many favorite Joseph quotes, by efficient by physician
Heal thyself.
Yeah, yeah. Mix. I always struggle with my PHs sometimes, but yeah, heal thyself. So no, I really, really like that point. And actually, where even if you're not necessarily in a massive organization, or you're like this big CEO, understanding your story in life and being able to evolve and influence others is really, really key to understand yours. And you've given some examples there, so Thank you for outlining some of those. So my next question really was about some of the biggest challenges perhaps you've seen in leadership, and some of the, some of the people you've worked with. What would you say? There's probably, a range and a vast across that, different challenges or whatever. But what are some of the main ones you've experienced?
Well, I mean, I think every year, every quarter, every season has its own unique challenges that comes with it. And right now, one of the most difficult things for people is to find talented, good people. At least on this side of the pond, in the United States, they're calling the current economy the Great Resignation, where over 40 million people out of a workforce of about 160, think about that, that's almost 25% of the workforce, has left their jobs since April of 2021. So we came out of a pandemic and a shutdown, only to now be in a place where people are leaving their jobs in droves. And it was interesting because one study said globally, over 40% of the workforce in the last year has considered leaving their jobs globally. So think about that. So, I mean, you find yourself as, if there's ever been a time when it takes a leader to really shape the narrative and rewrite the story and take control of the scripts that are taking place, this means that for many times we've had the privilege of ignoring people when they're thinking in their head if they should even stay at our job. And I got bad news for you. I think John Maxwell has the quote, says, if you think you're a leader and you have no one following, you're only taking a walk. It takes followers to be a leader. And if everybody quits and goes the other way, so never like before have we needed to evaluate and really increase the leadership skills that we have in order to have an impact on our direct teams, but also for our organizations and for the world. And so that's one of the challenges I'm looking at right now, that it's everywhere. And some people are sitting by and they're the victims of this, and they sit there and they do nothing. And then other people, I know that many of our clients have become the recipients of these issues. So they've actually recreated their job postings. We've reshaped the narrative and helped create new job postings that invites people who are thinking about leaving their job, that want more work-life balance, that want a career in an environment that they're going to be supported and appreciated, to come work for us. And that has become a very significant part of one of the strategies that leaders are using right now, because they understand the dynamics and they understand the times.
Yeah, like that. And just like really being more aware and open to support employees in general to get more people on board. So one kind of question I have, like lots of people reach out with their challenges, in particular on this with self-confidence challenges. What's something a great leader can do to install more self-confidence into their followers or their workforce?
Yeah, I think the reality is that self-confidence does come from self, right?
Yeah.
And you can't override a person's will to make them confident. But it was interesting. I had a meeting earlier today, and I'm sitting in front of the CEO and as well as some of the leaders of a nonprofit group that's doing incredible work, one of the largest ones here in the place where I live. And I went over to their facility, and we had a meeting. And the reason I got the invitation was because a young man who I spoke into his life well over 20 years ago. He heard me speak, and there was some mentorship involved. He says, I know who we need to get for the next phase of this organization. And he began to speak to, as he was introducing me to his executive team, the impact that I had on his life to help him grow as an individual. And many of the things that I asked him to do, he had trouble when he was younger, feeling confident, getting in front of people. And I kind of forced the issue. I said, no, I'm going to invite you to do it. And we're going to do it side by side. And I actually had him co-teaching with me a little bit. And those little things that I was able to do gave him confidence that made him feel, but he had to take action. If he had sat there and not responded or refused. He had the opportunity to do that. So as leaders, the best we can do is create the opportunity. But many times leaders are so busy trying to be in the spotlight that they haven't taken the time to say, this isn't about making, you're already the leader. This isn't about making you shine. How can I use my platform as an environment to allow other people to elevate and shine their skills? One of the many coaching certifications we have is with multipliers, Liz Wiseman. And it's about tapping into people's hidden genius. Everybody has a degree of genius. And how can I tap into that genius and release them to become the type of people that they're capable of becoming? So that's one of the elements that I think it's critical that a leader is looking around, they're scanning the environment. How can I make other people better? So it's often said that if you ask the wrong question, you will always get the wrong answer. But if you ask the right question, only sometimes you'll get the wrong answer. And so my thought is, most leaders are asking the wrong question. They're asking, can I get people to perform better? That's the wrong question. The right question should be, how can I activate people to get the best out of themselves? And stop focusing on you and your results, focus on them and their potential, and watch what they're able to accomplish. And I think that's part of where a leader really can take the priorities and move in the right direction.
Yeah. And yeah, I'm always a big believer in the quality of questions myself as a coach. There's many coaches out there asking those quality questions, and having gone to, I don't know, UPW with Tony Robbins about 4 or 5 times, it kind of gets into your mind a little bit as well, which isn't a bad thing, and listening to Joseph repeatedly as well. But yeah, I love what you're saying about the questions and actually asking themselves the right question and how they can create the opportunities. And I like what you said right at the start, because you could lead or give people the opportunity, but it's actually down to them to get their self-confidence, because they are the self. You can't do it for them. So it's about creating the opportunities and asking those right questions that are going to lead to the right answers some of the time anyway, like you said. So
absolutely.
Yeah, so
absolutely.
Some great points there. One kind of like final point, and I always like to touch on this because it's about imposter syndrome, because lots of people have this kind of feeling of imposter syndrome, like they're not worthy of doing something, they're not worthy of being in this position, at many different levels. Is this something, and I like to emphasize it because some people just think they're alone when they're experiencing it, and I just like to share it, that you're not alone, because many people experience it. And is imposter syndrome something you regularly find with the leaders you work with?
Absolutely. And I think that I've had that conversation around 4 or 5 times this week. And a great degree of it that I'm talking with the leaders spoke with about this week, it almost seems ridiculous that a thought, a vision, and I'm speaking specifically now to entrepreneurial leaders. You create a company, you create an idea, you hire people. And I talked to a guy this week that's had a company for 10 years, is doing well over $10 million, which is probably over 7 million pounds. And, and it just growing a really, really, really strong company, but he's never put together a vision, mission, and culture. And he says, I know I'm supposed to do it. And I called him out. I said, I know why you haven't done it. He says, why? I said, because it feels artificial and fake to you to develop a concept within your own mind that's your vision, mission, and culture, and expect other people to live by it as their credo. That feels inauthentic to you, doesn't it? And he says, yes. And I called it out, and he felt so relieved, because he never could figure out why he couldn't do it. And because it feels fake. It's coming from your mind, your heart. And so we all feel fake. We all feel like frauds. We all feel like fake. Well, I will say this. There are some narcissists and sociopaths out there that don't feel that way. And hopefully they don't find themselves in leadership positions because they're very controlling, manipulative, and abusive. But for the majority of society that have a healthy awareness and humility around the fact that we get to serve and lead other people, it feels inauthentic to create ideas. But if you don't create and capture people's imaginations and tell them the direction and the vision of where you're going, if you don't shape the culture, it will shape itself. If you don't establish the values and the credo and the culture that you want to live by, then it will create itself. And so it's not just that it's a good thing to do. It's required of us as leaders to overcome the imposter syndrome, to begin. And I do it every year. I'm telling you, it's something I've wrestled with for years, because I've ran my company for well over 11 and a half years now. And it's something I've wrestled with when I have team members, that I have to hold them accountable to an idea that is a concept that came out of my head. But if I don't do it, then their default will be destructive and create a culture that I don't want. So I have to be intentional about that. And leaders have to capture that. They have to understand that you're not doing this for you. The company or the organization isn't about you. It's about providing for other people and adding value to other people. So really beginning to grab hold of ourselves. And so I'm not saying you don't listen to the voices in your head. I listen to the voices in my head, but what I do is I ask different questions. And that kind of strengthens me a little bit. So I ask the question, says, I'm sensing a little fear there. I'm sensing a little self-criticism. I'm curious. What is that fear? What is that self-criticism trying to teach me? And I step back, and now I'm not in the position of a victim listening to that voice. I'm now a curious observer. What are you trying to tell me? And by doing that, I'm empowered to change the narrative, because I realize that many times that voice of self-criticism and fear and doubt, they're all just self-protection mechanisms in order to make you feel safe in an environment where you're doing something and you're trying something that's really scary. And so, and in order to grow, growth is on the other side of fear. So you just have to grow through it. It won't go away. You just have to grow through it.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you emphasized that point about it doesn't go away, because there's often a misconception I used to have myself, and it's just like I about 10 years ago, I'd have seen someone like you and go, oh, that guy's never had any fears in his life. He completely doesn't have those negative voices. But now I know, as I'm growing, the more actually it pops up. And then, it's not about me not having zero negative voices or challenges in my head. It's about how I deal with it. And similar to you, it's about, interesting. Oh, maybe this shows I'm growing because this voice is popping up. Maybe I'm about to level up. So I like your points about curiosity, but I also love the point about when you said looking at something wider than yourself, the bigger vision, the bigger values while you're doing it. Because for me, you can get caught in your own head, and guilty of it from time to time, when you get caught in your own head and you're like listening to those voices. So that was also a great point I really valued, about actually looking at something wider as well than just kind of your own thoughts. So thank you for sharing 100%. That, Stephen.
Awesome. Oh, my pleasure.
So just before we sort of like wrap up, are there any other sort of like final points you'd like to share about leadership and self-confidence?
Well, I just want to encourage people, is the tendency is to feel like you've exhausted a topic, you've heard about something. And I know people they'll fancy a podcast here and fancy a podcast there, but I think the work that you're doing is incredibly important. And I think there needs to be a commitment sometimes to understand that process. And I think it's best that people really latch on to a podcast like this and really begin to draw themselves in, so that they can start moving forward and understanding that it's not going to happen in a day, but if you commit to a daily walk, you'll start to see the results. And over time, you'll crawl, then you'll walk, then you'll fly. And so I love what you're doing. And so I think people need to be engaged and keep it up.
Appreciate that. Appreciate you saying that. And I kind of thought that came to my mind there was the action versus activity thing. You do something one-off, like going to the gym, go to the gym once, you're not going to be fit for life. It's activity, and it's the same for the mind and your confidence. And the leaders you work with, they're doing things over and over again to make them great. So that's a really good point to end up with. And love what you said about listening to an uplifting podcast. So yeah, great point on that one. So Stephen, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you here, and I'm sure the listeners are going to want to find out more about you and what you do. So where can they find you?
Yeah, I think the easiest place is just our website, experienceleadership.com, www.experienceleadership.com. It's a really easy place to find us. We're pretty easy to access, easily accessible. And, all of our social media links are kind of housed there. So.
Brilliant. And we'll be sure to take the links off you so we can leave that in the episode description for people to find you as well. After
Excellent.
this episode. That'd be awesome. So once again, thank you so much for being on the episode, Stephen, and lots of value, as I knew there would be.
Thank you so much. My pleasure, Johnny. And I think we're just in this universe together. Just keep growing and keep making a difference. Thank you.
Awesome. And thank you for listening today. And remember to work on that self-confidence every single day.